Hello all, A Knife's Tale here, and I'm bringing you another knife review. Honestly, though, I did this one once already, but I discovered something kind of during the review that I hadn't noticed, and I was going to add a whole nother piece in, edited after the fact, and it didn't work the way I wanted it to, so I'm just going to redo the whole thing, including what I found. This is the WE Knives Attor, and if you're thinking about buying this, I strongly suggest you watch this video. What is the WE Knives Attor? This is an integral, one-piece titanium dual ground, I guess that's a Tonto, in CPM 20CV, designed by Dalibor Bergram, a very interesting and kind of legendary at this point custom knife maker. It runs on bearings. It is a frame lock. And we will move on to specs with that. Blade length is 3.5 on the dot. Overall length is just a hair more than 8 3/8. And the handle length is 4 7/8. I'll do a quick comparison with knives from its... Get that out of there. Sister company, or I guess they're the same company, just different division. The small knife comparison being the Civivi Elementum, and the full-size knife comparison being the Conspirator. And this knife is bigger. It's still a full-size knife, but it is bigger than both. It is not particularly slim in height, though it's not really, it looks like it would be. It's not really that much taller than the Conspirator, even. And it's contoured titanium, so that will throw it off a little bit. Probably at its max, it's probably about as thick as the Conspirator. Let's just double check that with the calipers. It's a tiny bit thicker than the Conspirator, if I remember correctly. I may be completely off base on that. I'm completely off base on that. Why does this feel like it's just as thick? It's actually a tiny bit thinner. Okay. $125,000 on the blade stock. And behind the edge is pretty nice. I'm going to call that 15 thousandths behind the edge. It's pretty thin. Yeah, I'm going to call that 15 thousandths behind the edge. I guess this edge up here could be a little bit more, but I don't think it's going to be too much. In that exact spot, it is almost identical. So, yeah. Weight of the Attor, I don't know exactly how they want it pronounced. Zero that out. 4.82 ounces. So, it's not an ounce an inch, of course, but it's a titanium integral. It's not going to be. There's no milling on the inside. But it's still actually not that heavy. T8. T8 for the pivot. T8 for the body screw, or that's not even a body screw, that's just a pocket clip screw. It's a T8. There's one screw that you really have to worry about, and it's a T8. I like seeing T8s all around. That's good. Definitely good. Unfortunately, what's going to be coming up soon is not so good. We'll just take a quick look. This knife is in the gray polish that we've been doing, and I've had one knife that was in that polish that sort of looked like it was splattered right around the pivot where it didn't look like it finished evenly, but this one, it looks pretty consistently even. You can see just like the whole thing is, if you really get close up on it, is like tiny little speckles. They're kind of everywhere. I kind of wish that they could smooth those out a little bit more. But from a distance, you don't notice them, and it just looks like a continuous gray polish, but they are there, just subtle. I don't know if that's something to do with the finish, or, well, I mean, I know it's the finish, but I don't know what kind of finish it is, so. It still looks pretty darn good, and because the splatters are very small, very minor, and very uniform on this one, I like it. The other one, like I said, had some big, weird, dark spots around the pivot on both sides. Didn't like that. I sent that back. That was not okay with me. So we've got stop pins right here on the outside. And they're actually part of the problem because they are not the stop pins when closed. We'll talk about that more in just a couple minutes. Got a very comfortable, very neutral handle. This pocket clip is, in my hand, not great. That is a big, big flat spot on the end. It doesn't make it work that well. I mean, it works, but it's can be a little bit more tricky than it probably needs to be. And honestly, when you hold it in hand, you feel a plateau right in the middle of your hand. It's not uncomfortable at all. It's just something you have to get used to, because it's a little bit odd. You don't think it's going to be there, because you're not used to it with most knives. Again, not uncomfortable in the slightest, and the grip other than that is pretty neutral. But I do kind of wish that they just, cut off that and just rounded the whole thing, maybe give a slight angle onto it. That's just my opinion on there, but the lock bar cutouts are done in multiple sections, and I didn't really have too much trouble with them under the pocket clip. But I haven't carried it extensively. I have used it a little bit. We tends to do 5961 HRC on their M390 and CPM 20CV, which everybody wishes it was 60 to 62, at least. 61 to 63 is probably the best case scenario and more than reasonable, and you can probably expect to get some of the better performance out of a M390 20CV. They're analogs of each other. But this is very sharp. Wii does a good job on their edge. Thin blade stock, thin behind the edges, relatively thin, most of their knives. So they still perform quite well, but not the optimal heat treat. There's a lock bar insert for contact, and the pivot collars are plasma, flame anode, whatever they want to call it. I don't really like too much of that, but just that little pop there isn't bad. And as always, the Wii logo is on the, well, not always, but often the Wii logo is on the pivot, which I still think looks pretty good. And that also means it's not on the blade, which is almost completely sterile. They did put Bergram's name and the steel on that, but that's pretty much hidden. I mean, that's tiny. It's there, but no big deal there. So overall, other than the pocket clip, and even that's not exactly uncomfortable, this seems like a really good knife, especially being an integral and a reasonably priced one. This is coming in at... Hold on just a moment. Sorry about that. I'm back. It was just a moment for you guys. But this is coming in at $352 for the cheapest model. The more standard ones are around $374 to $378. So $375-ish. And of course there's a Dam Steel version coming in at $637, which is a lot to tack on for Damasteel, but weirdly enough, being an integral, this knife kind of justifies the Damasteel the most, because you're getting Damasteel and Timascus on this thing, and you're jumping up to 600, but a lot of Wii's standard knives that just get Damasteel tacked on end up in that 600 range. This is doing the most for it. So, I mean, that's a good thing. I suppose I should talk about the action. It's a little bit tight. It's not super drop shotty, but I did get it centered. No play, no problems there. And as someone who has experienced at least one of Bergham's customs, his knives in general are much more tight and sort of slow-rolly, kind of smooth. And this sort of bridges a gap between it, being on bearings. I think his knives are predominantly, if not almost exclusively, on phosphor bronze. Or at least washers of some sort. I've never taken one apart. So, now, we come to the final actual problems that I can now talk about. And I'm no editor in video, so I just made a drawing. So here's your knife, right? This is the knife in the handle. There's the handle. There's the blade sitting inside of it. And, as I said, to highlight this real fast, I want to get it, make sure you can see it. These are not the stop pins when closed. As you can see, they are not touching Yes Dog. This is the important part. You cannot interrupt here. As you can see, they are not touching the frame. When I saw this knife, I just assumed, okay, open position stop pin, closed position stop pin. No problem. That would be absolutely no problem whatsoever. It's not the case. The closed position stop pin is right here. This nodule, bump, whatever. I didn't see that one coming until I really looked in there, and you can sort of see where it's contacting. There's, let's see if we can get it in there. You can kind of see it right there, that little darker area. It's a raised area right here. This is what it looks like. And this piece connects with that bump, and that's your stop pin. And that is a gigantic problem. Why? Because this bump sits arguably lower than the rest of the edge, even. Because it kind of goes up from there. So, I mean, it's at least on par with the bottom of the edge. So while they gave you a sharpening choil, and they put the plunge grind perfectly behind the sharpening choil, looks great. Wonderful. The problem is that when you go to sharpen this knife, if you are not aware of this issue and extremely careful, your stone can easily hit this area. Very easily. All it would take would be going a little too far over on, if you're doing that, a little too far over on it. If you're on a fixed angle system, just wandering a little too far, you're paying attention to one side of the stone a little bit too much, it could easily hit that. And the second you start hitting and wearing away at that, this knife is not going to sit in its closed position properly. You're going to start getting some detent lash and play, because the knife is capable of going too far into the handle, because you're essentially wearing away where the stop is. So as this wears away, the knife's going to start going into the handle too far. Now, the stops being that close means that there is possibly enough room to prevent it from ever, if you continue to wear that away, from ever hitting the edge ever hitting the inside of the handle. Maybe. I don't know how much room is in there. It's really hard to tell. I can't take it apart. It's an integral, and it looks pretty close, honestly. If I really look in there, the blade edge is not that far, I don't think, away from the top inner part of the handle. But those sitting there may be enough to stop it from actually contacting and ruining your edge. But at the very least, you've still got playroom there because they're not contacting. So the blade won't necessarily fall into or stay in the detent hole appropriately when closed, because it now has room beyond the detent hole, whereas now it closes and the detent ball falls into the hole on the blade right where it needs to and hits at the stop. Great. As soon as that stop starts getting worn away, you're going to have a chance to go deeper. So, that's going to cause play, that's going to cause... I don't know if it could cause the knife to pop out in your pocket or anything, because it's could be jumping the hole a little bit, but it's definitely going to cause movement. And that would be all from just not knowing and tapping this area, or accidentally tapping this area because you're not paying perfect attention. So, I don't want to sharpen this knife. I don't want to take that chance. This knife is now just sort of a collector's piece. Because I don't know how it's going to completely react. I don't know how much room there is. It potentially, if it does have enough room to touch, and it's that close to the spine underneath. Like I said, if it does start tapping, it could even be touching. Who knows? And that would have completely ruined the edge, as it would be hitting the underside of the titanium. So, as I said, that is a really big issue. Like, a fatal flaw. That kind of ruins this knife. In my opinion, again, if you're going to use it for extremely light, rare use, you're not going to probably ever sharpen it, you're just getting it as a collector's piece, you'll be fine. But if you intended to get a sturdy integral as a user, and I mean, this wouldn't make a terrible one, you have to be very careful and aware that that's a thing, because it's hitting right there. It's like putting the stop pin right behind the edge. It's the same effect on, well, let's see, where is it? I have one here. It's the same exact effect as the stop pin here hitting directly behind the edge. That's where the stop pin hits. That's where your edge is. You can't cut in a choil because you're going to start potentially, I mean, you can sort of, kind of, barely, maybe cut in a choil based on where it hits. But you have to be really careful for this knife. Because if you hit in this area, you're going to have to start having closed issues problems. This is the same thing. Except, arguably, even worse, because this one gives you some sharpening life before you ever are going to come close to that stop pin up in there. Right? You might get a smile, and it might not look great, but you may be able to cut in a sharpening choil, or at the very least you can live with the smile and realize that, okay, there's only so much life I can get out of this thing before risking maybe touching up into here. Yes, dog. Yes, I know. You're as upset about it as I am. I understand. This one's arguably worse because the area that you can't touch is on the same plane as the dang edge, so you run an even greater risk, and it's hanging out right there, not sort of jammed up inside the blade. It's just hanging way out with the rest of the knife, so you run a much higher chance of just tapping this thing on your stone. And a tap on it is probably not going to be enough to do anything, but if you tap it several times during the sharpen and it wears away, you're in trouble. It's kind of the same issue that this one has, though this one, if you're really careful and you make sure to stay in front of this area right here, you could potentially cut in a sharpening choil. And speaking of sharpening choil, say you manage to successfully get it all the way down here and you've cut up that much life of the blade. This is a thin blade. You still have life there. You have to cut in a sharpening choil. Guess what you can hit there? If you jump, or if you're using Dremel and it just bumps or something like that, you now straight cut into it. This is, like I said, in my opinion, pushing into the realm of a catastrophic flaw that prevents this knife from really being used. Or at least sharpened. Without extreme precaution and knowledge. So, that really, really sucks. Because I like this other than that. I don't like the pocket clip, but other than that, and I got used to the pocket clip, so whatever. I like this knife. I like Bergham's designs. But I cannot recommend. In fact, I would arguably, if you think you're even slightly inclined to use this or be careless for a moment when sharpening it, you shouldn't get this knife. Because you're going to screw yourself up. So, that is my take on the Attor. And unfortunately, it went from what was going to be a pretty darn positive review to, oh, crap, that is bad. This is, of course, my knife. I'm going to keep it. I'm just basically not going to carry it very much, if at all. Because it has lost a little tiny bit of its bite, but I don't want to sharpen this knife. Even if I cut in a choil, it's not going to necessarily alleviate the issue. So, that's it. Review is, unfortunately, not recommended, not really a good design. That's all from me. I hope this may have helped you make a decision on the knife, or warn you away from the knife if you really liked it or something, because it's an affordable integral by all accounts compared to most. It should be good, but it's not. So, if it helped, if you have any thoughts, leave them down below. Like, subscribe if you want to help the channel. Comment on any video. Anything. For the algorithm, for all I care. It helps. That's all. See you next time.